Hello, everybody. On behalf of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, I'd like to welcome you to tonight's Fertility Forum. My name is Cindy Rodrigue. I'm a volunteer with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, Mississippi, Louisiana Chapter Board of Trustees. The mission of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society is to cure leukemia, lymphoma, melanoma, and Hodgkin's disease, and to improve the quality of life for patients and their families. Tonight's program is an example of the educational resources LLS provides to patients, caregivers, and healthcare professionals about blood cancer, treatment, and survivorship. At this time, we are ready to begin the program. Please help me welcome our panel moderator, Dr. Amy Young, Abe Mickle Professor, Chair, Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, LSU School of Medicine.
Thank you, and I'd like to start out by thanking the LLS and Mary Catherine for all of her hard work in setting up this event. To me, today is sort of a monumental day. I came to New Orleans about 20 months ago as the chair of OBGYN, and my overall vision for the department was to try and bring the fragmented women's health care across the city back together. And one of the facets of bringing that care back together is actually to develop interdisciplinary teams to achieve something that hadn't previously existed here in the city. And so one specific facet was this area of oncofertility. And so it was very much intentioned before I came that this would be something that we wanted to achieve. And I was just lucky enough to be invited to a meeting by Maria and got to sit next to Mary Catherine, and then one thing led to another. And so the reason that tonight is monumental is that between our survivor panelists and between our physician panelists, we truly have a multidisciplinary team here to talk about this subject. And to me, I think it's critically important, and the number one goal is that we have the ability to offer services to young men and women, children, in our area and in our region that previously they may not have access to or may have had to go outside the city or the state to be able to obtain as far as future fertility options and fertility preservation. But moreover, what I hope that we achieve through meetings like this and continued dialogues is that every patient will have the ability to have their future fertility concerns addressed through their initial workup and treatment whenever possible. And I know that that's not always possible. And then ultimately, the biggest goal that we hope to achieve is that regardless of payer, insurance, financial status of the patient, that these options might be available at some point to everybody. So that's what I would call my big, hairy, audacious goal to think about Jim Collins' work that I would like to see come to fruition. And so what I'd like to do tonight is to start out with introduction of our first panelist. Our first panelist tonight is a survivor, and this is Laura Weems-Ibarra. And she's going to address you today from the table. And we're going to be a little bit informal from this because I wanted to make sure that everybody's quite comfortable in asking the questions they want to ask when the time is right. Laura is also, of our survivor panelists, the one that had the latest diagnosis and the latest treatment. So her diagnosis and treatment is fresher than it is for probably the rest of the panelists. And so her perspective may be actually a little bit different from some of those that have gone on to fertility successes. She was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma on May 5th, 2012. And her husband was deployed, and so she was at home alone at that time. So I think she'll probably talk to us a little bit more about that. She made some decisions to go through IVF and began taking Lupron injections prior to the induction of her chemotherapeutic agents. And so I'd like to turn it over so we can hear her story.
For giving me the opportunity to be here tonight, and for really everyone who helped make this possible. I think it's a really important discussion that needs to take place in the young adult community, cancer survivor community. So as she was saying, I was diagnosed when I was 25 years old. It took about 3 weeks for me to get my biopsy results back. It took a couple biopsies before they were able to diagnose what was wrong with me. And before they could start treatment, I was very lucky because right from the beginning, the doctor that performed my biopsy before I even saw my oncologist had already started talking to me about fertility options and made sure to kind of put that on the Q&A list for my oncologist. And before I left my oncologist's office, she had made an appointment for me with a fertility specialist. So I was extremely blessed in a way in which I think a lot of young adult cancer patients aren't, that that information was really put in front of me. And I really appreciated that because I would have had no clue that that was something that might be hindered from chemotherapy treatments. Because when you're going through that diagnosis process, you're so overwhelmed and you're already Googling so much information, you're being inundated with so many things that it's really important for the healthcare professionals to kind of put that information in front of their patients because we just don't have the capacity to even be thinking about a lot of this stuff because it's all brand new news. So I was very lucky. Let's see. So basically, once I went to the fertility specialist, I was completely unprepared for what to expect. I never tried to have a child. I had one ultrasound many years ago. That was just your basic surface ultrasound. They told me to have a full bladder for that appointment, so that's what I did. I came with a very full bladder, not knowing that, it was actually going to be a vaginal ultrasound, which was, obviously that was not good for the doctor, and it was very uncomfortable for me. So preparing your patients for things that they've never experienced before, as in letting them know what status of bladder fullness they should expect for that appointment is very important because that was a little traumatizing for me because I had no clue what to expect. So that's just something little that I found could have improved my experience. So essentially the first half of the appointment was basically just making sure that everything was already operating properly. Since, again, I never tried to get pregnant before, so there's no real basis for comparison for me. So that was good to know that everything was kind of already going the way it was supposed to be. And then my doctor kind of went over the various fertility options that were out there for me, which I'm sure the doctors will go over a little bit more in detail later. But the basic ones were egg harvesting. So basically, I take hormone shots to help my body release as many eggs as possible. And then they would go in and harvest them and then cryopreserve them until I was ready to have children later on. The second option was IVF. So that's basically egg harvesting, plus actually using the sperm to fertilize and create embryos, which was obviously a problem for me because my husband was in Iraq at the time. So that was kind of a challenge. And the third option was the Lupron shot, which is basically a shot that they give cancer patients. I think it has other uses as well, to kind of shut down the ovaries, because there's actually studies that show that it will help preserve ovarian function during chemotherapy and radiation, so that they can actually have children naturally later on, potentially, without having to go through fertility treatments. So it was definitely a learning experience. It's not something, the average 25-year-old has to really even think about. So it was definitely a little overwhelming and, it was definitely a hard time for me. But it was also really interesting at the same time to see that there's so many options for people nowadays that 5-10 years ago even, relatively recently, just didn't really exist as much. So it's very different for the average fertility patient. I hadn't tried to have a child before. I didn't have a whole lot of time to research my options. And what my healthcare, team really did for me is they really put me in touch with some resources that really helped. There's several charitable organizations out there that actually provide, low-cost options. When I say low cost, they're still very expensive. There's the Fertile Hope program, which actually is a Livestrong initiative. And I'm actually really lucky. I live in Austin, Texas, where they're headquartered. So they have a lot of partner clinics in my area. So, I did some price checking around, and for those locations, it was going to be around $7,500 to have one round of IVF treatment. There's also a clinic up in Dallas that also offered some options as well. But unfortunately, there was those costs only included the IVF by itself. There's also storage costs that you have to keep in mind. Long-term storage while you're in treatment and while you're waiting to have kids. That, a lot of people don't realize that all costs money. You're kind of paying rent for an embryo. So that was really, eye-opening as well. Just learning all the different costs involved in the procedures. And I also didn't include what it would cost to actually have, embryos implanted after, my cancer treatment was over. So it was definitely interesting and a learning curve for me. So after that, appointment where I was kind of getting all the information together, my doctor personally wrote a letter to my husband's commander while he was deployed, which is funny because how often do you have to have your doctor write a letter to your husband's boss saying, I need my husband's sperm, send him home? That's exactly what happened to me. So you quickly learn as a cancer patient, you have to kind of just get over all of your inhibitions. You have to be willing for everyone in a hospital to see you naked. You have to be willing to talk about your bowel movements and your menstrual cycle and your husband's sperm counts. It's just a completely different social experience than anything else I've ever been through. But the letter worked. The Army got him home within 48 hours. That's unheard of in the military. And he was with me, and we were able to do IVF. And they're able to harvest 17 eggs. Of those 17 eggs, we got about 9 that were fertilized. And then out of those 9, we got about 4 that made it to the blastocyst stage, which is the stage in which they can be cryopreserved, which it's kind of sad when you think about it. Human reproduction is not very efficient. So that's also very scary for any fertility patient. You're kind of rolling the dice in a lot of ways as to if you'll even get embryos. And I haven't gotten to the implantation stage yet, but then you're kind of rolling the dice as to if they're even going to implant. So you're looking at spending a lot of money for, kind of an offside shot that you'll have a baby at the end of it. But, we're willing to do it because, I think the majority of people want children. So it's definitely challenging. In order to do the fertility treatments, that was a huge, traumatic experience in and of itself. So I did 10 days of hormone shots, and they shipped them to me in a powder form, and then I actually had to mix them together myself and give myself the shot. And I'd had no medical training or anything ever before, so I'm literally watching a home video, like a how-to video that they send you in an email. I just watched that on repeat 17 times leading up to giving myself the shot. I felt kind of like a pro at the end of my 10 days. I was like, okay, I got this. It's not hard at all. And that particular hormone shot was called Brevel. And it was given in a very small, 5/8 of an inch needle that I could, either put in my thigh or in my stomach tissue. And there's a lot of different, everyone has an opinion over where's the best place to give your shot. So that was kind of funny. I was on all the online forums with other cancer patients being like, what did you do for this? And this is scary. So there's really kind of community out there of us kind of sharing information with one another. The last shot I had to give myself was an 1.5 inch long HCG shot, which is basically the shot that tells my body, hey, it's time to ovulate and release those 17 eggs right before they're harvested. And I thought I had it down, and I had told my husband he had to go to his dad's graduation in Baton Rouge, and I was like, yeah, sure, go, I'll be fine. I can give myself that shot, no problem. And I could not. It was huge. I was completely petrified. I was like, there's just no way. So I obsessed over it for 2 hours, and they were very you have to give yourself this shot at this exact time. And I was 2 hours late, so I was already worried. I'm like, oh no, they're not gonna be able to get enough eggs because I didn't give myself the shot right on time. And I had to wait until my friend got off work, who was a nurse, thankfully. She was like, sure, I can give you a shot. And I had to get my other friend to drive me to Florence, which was this little tiny town about 25 miles away from where I was living. And I literally, went to a church parking lot and dropped trow, and she gave me the shot in my butt. And it took her like 2 seconds, and I'm like, I'm such a baby. It took me like 2 hours to sit here staring at the needle, and she did it in about 2 seconds. But, I think that's one thing, maybe like warning your patients about what exactly the shot's going to be like and what exactly they need to do. It's very intimidating to someone who doesn't know how to give shots and doesn't do it on a day-to-day basis. So maybe providing them with resources and clinics that they might be able to go to help out in that. It would have saved me a lot of trauma. So, but luckily, I got my 4 embryos and it all ended up working out pretty well. So those are really the main things, I kind of learned from my experience. I just want to kind of say that I am one of the lucky ones. I really am. I was very blessed. My husband's in the Army, as I've mentioned, and we have probably the best health care available. And it paid for pretty much everything except fertility treatments. That's one of the only things that TRICARE will not pay for. But because that TRICARE is paying for everything else, we were able to kind of make those sacrifices. And we're also very fortunate because even though we ended up not going with the charitable organizations, our healthcare system kind of gave us a kind of like an all-encompassing payment plan that covered the egg harvesting, all the fertility appointments. It actually also covers the implantation once we choose to go and retrieve our embryos. And it also covers the storage. A friend of mine went through the same process about a year before I did. And she actually has to pay, it started off at $300 a year, and it goes up $100 a year every year after that. So I'm incredibly blessed, and but not a lot of people aren't. And a lot of people kind of have to sacrifice, preserving the fertility in order to start their fight. The fertility treatments delayed my chemo by about a month. And I was stage 1, so I was willing to make that sacrifice. But a lot of people just don't have that kind of time, especially women. We're on a very specified menstrual cycle, and, anything can throw off the process pretty easily. However, those programs like Fertile Hope that I mentioned, you can go to fertilehope.org. And there's also the Share Institute, which is haveababy.com. They offer not only the IVF, but they also offer egg harvesting for women who might not be in a relationship. They might not have access to sperm like I did. And they also have sperm baking for the men. And some of it's fairly low cost. The egg harvesting, compared to the IVF, if you can't afford IVF right this second, the egg harvesting was less than $1,000, I believe. So there's a lot of options out there for people who might not be as blessed as I was. And another thing I kind of want to mention is the fact that I am 25. There's a lot of young adults in that 18 to 39-year-old age range. We're the only age group where cancer survivorship rates haven't improved since the 1970s. And a lot of people don't know that. There's about 75,000 of us diagnosed every year. So it's definitely something that affects a lot of people. And there's definitely needs to be more awareness about it. So I want to thank everyone here for being in this room and being willing to kind of talk about it, because, I know a lot of people who aren't here today. So I can't emphasize enough that I'm lucky and very blessed. So thank you so much.
So I'd like to thank you so much for coming, Laura, and sharing your story. So that for you guys, the reason that Laura's dressed so beautifully is that she's going to a party because she's a bridesmaid in a wedding tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay, so we're so happy that you shared that with us.
I forgot to mention, I do blog at thelymphomaletters.com, and I left some business cards on the back table over there. And there's also an iPad set up if you want to check out my blog. But more importantly, if you have any questions, since I won't be able to be here for the panel, please feel free to email me. I know I'm not an expert or anything, but I might have been through something that you have a question about. So please feel free to ask. So thank y'all so much.
Thank you. Our next panelist that I'd like to introduce is Dr. Rod Hoxie, and I've had the privilege of knowing Dr. Hoxie personally probably for about 4 or 5 years, and then he was part of the reason why I came to LSU as the chairman, and shortly he's going to be leaving us to take on a bigger and better opportunity, but he's had a lot to do with getting this program up and running and starting to understand who all the players might be and collecting the data that we need to try and achieve the vision that I explained before. Dr. Hoxie comes to us as a Montana farm boy, and so his interest in fertility was really related to cows and pigs and sheep, I think, once upon a time. But he is a reproductive endocrinologist. He went to Northwestern University in Chicago, stayed on and did his training, and then he worked as a general OBGYN for 6 years, which I think is sort of an important sounding board, and he made a choice to go back into reproductive endocrinology and infertility. And he had an active practice outside Chicago for 20 years and thought he'd come to New Orleans to retire, and then my predecessor was smart enough to lure him into the department. So I'm going to let him talk to you guys a little bit about what oncofertility is and what it means and why it's so important.
Thank you, Dr. Young. Can you hear me? I know my voice is a little bit hoarse today. This is a really important project, and when Dr. Young asked me to get it organized and basically to try to organize a program where we could put all the pieces together. And that's what's really important, and I think Laura very eloquently stated some of her frustrations. She's a marvelous teacher, by the way. She really learned her lessons well and could go on to help a lot of people through this. And I think that Dr. Sarter will attest that's what a lot of our infertility patients, whether they're cancer patients or survivors or not, really learn to do a lot of these things for themselves. So a lot of the things we ask our fertility patients to do is really no different whether they're a cancer survivor or an infertility patient. But of course we've got some unique situations because of the situations involving the diagnosis of cancer. I think the thing that's really, and I'm going to date myself here, but I'm going to give you a couple of little anecdotes, but what's been amazing to me, and I think why we're all together today and in these past few years, is the tremendous progress made both in the field of oncology as well as the field of infertility. We're able to help people a lot more than they were when I first started out. Just a little story, even though I grew up on a farm and everything had to do with reproduction and farm animals, I went to medical school to be a pediatric surgeon. That was my goal. And a lot of students that head off to medical school have some preconceived thoughts of what they think they want to do. And one of my early rotations was in pediatrics. And in one of my pediatric rotations was the oncology ward. In those days, most pediatric patients were admitted to the hospital right after diagnosis and unfortunately stayed there until they died. When I was on the oncology rotation, the thing that tore me up and made me decide I couldn't be a pediatrician was every day when I returned to the wards, another one of my children had died of leukemia or lymphoma. And so just to know the tremendous progress we've made, the oncologists made, and the survivorship, the cure rates, if you would, is remarkable. So when I started, the survivor rate wasn't anywhere close to 90% that we may see in many of our cancers today. The other remarkable thing is that, as Dr. Young stated, I finished my OBGYN residency, went into general practice, and then I came back to do a fellowship in reproductive endocrinology. The first baby born by IVF in the United States was 1981. That's the year I started my fellowship at the University of Chicago, and I built the first IVF lab in the state of Illinois as a fellow. So I felt like I got on the ground floor, and just to see the progress. We used to think it was wonderful if we had a 5%. 1 out of 20 patients would get pregnant, not cancer patients. 1 out of 20 patients who went through IVF would get pregnant when I first started. Now it's remarkable if we don't have a 50%. So I throw those numbers out because it's important that when us experts, the specialists in oncology or infertility, talk to our patients, we talk to them about our success rates, right? So we want to give some idea to you all, because that's the answer you want to hear. Well, if I go through this treatment, how successful is it going to be? that I beat this lymphoma or leukemia, that I get pregnant. And that has to factor in how we counsel patients. And I think that's really an important thing. So, you know, in our specialties, the oncology as well as reproductive endocrinology and infertility, we've developed practice guidelines to try to give the practitioners the best evidence to tell us what forms of treatment are most successful, because that's how we have to counsel patients in order to advise you as to what treatments would be best for your particular disease, or what treatments would be best for you to successfully conceive and get pregnant. So we have practice guidelines, and along these lines, because there's a lot of other issues, ethical issues. What do we promise and what do we live up to in providing you advice on what is the best treatment option? So our medical specialties have tried to stay up and give us the practice guidelines, to give us the best evidence in what is the most effective treatments, but also to give us some guidance in what is truly ethical treatment. And in the field of infertility, certainly, if we're talking about cancer survivorship and offering this for your future quality of life, in other words, how do we advise the parents of a 2-year-old or a 4-year-old who can't obviously give consent about going through certain procedures, that we should harvest some testicular tissue or ovarian tissue so that when they survive their cancer and live to adulthood, that they can fulfill their life's dreams and quality of life of someday maybe having children of their own. And so, as we know, I mean, a 2-year-old can't give consent, and even a minor, so someone under 18 can't truly give consent. They can assent, so consents for pediatric age group is different than those of an adult age group. So the parents have to give the consent, and if a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old objects, no, I don't want to do that. Mommy, Daddy, I can't do that. You cannot force that on them. So they have to give their assent, and we have to make a judgment that it has potential benefit. So how could that child or even an adolescent know really what the potential benefit is? So that's a parental decision, and you have to counsel a child as best you can along those lines. So you see there's some unique situations that goes into the consultations that the oncologist or the reproductive endocrinologist have to take into account when we talk to these. So these are some of the dilemmas that are presented to the specialist, whether it be the oncologist or the reproductive endocrinologist. And, you know, each of us, the oncologist and reproductive endocrinologist, come at it from our own professional background and our own angle. I mean, for the oncologist, their utmost in their mind is what is my best advice for this particular patient is the best treatment to cure their cancer. And that has to be utmost in their mind. Now, we know that, you know, we've got to think about the long term. We expect our patients to survive. So as a cancer survivor and thinking about their quality of life, it's our responsibility and our duty to inform them of adverse reactions to the medication, what long-term sequelae may occur, and what benefits other treatments may be. So it is our responsibility, the oncologist, and they may not be as comfortable. They may not even be as up-to-date. It's hard enough for any of us to keep up-to-date in all of the advances in all of our special areas, let alone for an oncologist to get outside their area of comfort and know about all of the potentialities for fertility preservation for their patients. But they at least need to be aware of that. On the other hand, for the reproductive endocrinologist, we're not really up to knowing what each individual cancer treatment. Not all drugs have the same impact on fertility. Some drugs may be really relatively safe and have very little impact on a young man or young woman's future fertility. So we need to be able to have some direction from our oncology colleagues in terms of how do we advise what's best. It might be that the chemotherapy may have minimal effect, and so it might be just that we take a wait and watch, or we may know that it doesn't have an immediate effect but may cause a woman to have an earlier menopause. So maybe if she survives her cancer and her treatment, we'd be more aggressive, or at least advise her to be more aggressive after treatment. So there are all these different issues that come up, and I don't want to go into the specific details because I know my oncology colleagues and Dr. Sartor are going to talk about the particular aspects of it. But I think the other thing that I want to address, and I'd like to get some feedback from our audience here today, is how do we best serve you? Because I think one of the things we've recognized, and as Laura, I think, really very eloquently brought up, is that all the resources to make the decisions that sometimes have to be made in a very rapid sequence are not always available in one site. So I'd really love to hear the feedback on what types of things you'd like to see from your oncologist, from that program, or from their referrals. There are some excellent resources out there. Some of them have been mentioned. Actually, the LLS bulletin number 23 is an excellent document. I read that, and it really summarizes the fertility preservation issue very well. It does give some references in the back that are certainly are very useful. A couple of note, I think we've already mentioned Fertile Hope, which is a part of the Lance Armstrong organization, or a branch of that. But there's another one that I think maybe provides a little more detailed information. And so if you go on savemyfertility.org, that's actually a group from the Oncofertility, and I think Mary Catherine told me that she's put together that information in the back of the room. Just one word about the Oncofertility Consortium, and I'm proud of the fact that Northwestern University was one of the NIH-sponsored organizations that developed that. So Oncofertility was actually a term coined by them. There are 4 primary institutions that organize this, and what their goal is to really have several affiliates. So there are over 50 affiliated programs throughout the country that really combine oncology and infertility and provide all of the resources that patients need. That's sort of the model that I've been hoping to develop for us here, and Dr. Young is certainly willing to support, and hopefully we'll go forward with all of your encouragement to develop that kind of program for here in the Gulf region. So I think I'm going to leave it at that and pass the baton down the table here and to fill you in on a little bit more details.